true crime lovers. I don't know if you guys can see my shirt, but it says Slytherin. So any Harry Potter fans out there, I'm Team Slytherin. I'm House Slytherin. I was sorted into the Slytherin house when you first could do like the Pottermore quiz, like figure out what house you're in. And I always get Slytherin in every quiz. So Team Slytherin, if you're a Team Slytherin, leave your house emoji, the snake, down in the comments. It is October. We are in the month of spookiness. I mean, I don't know, Halloween is technically canceled because of COVID. I don't know. But I was watching Silence of the Lambs for like the 100th time.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
I was like, what the hell? Like, why haven't I done Ed Gein? Ed Gein is murderer, killer, grave robber, but he inspired so many films such as Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Norman Bates, the character of Norman Bates. A lot of these characters, so Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, are loosely inspired by Ed Gein and his crimes. So let's get into it. Ed Gein was born Edward Theodore Gein in August 27th, 1906 in Plainfield, Wisconsin. He had a father named George who was very alcoholic, abusive. He was like a severe alcoholic. He wasn't, a nice guy. His mother, Augusta, who he idolized, he was obsessed with her. He thought that she was like Jesus walking on water. Like, he just loved his mom so much. Ed also had an older brother named Henry, and so his mom was very religious and domineering, and she had all these thoughts about the townsfolk, like the town people, and she thought that they would corrupt her son. The mom with her, fanatic religious beliefs, and maybe like she wasn't all there. Maybe she suffered from mental illness. I don't know. But she decided to take Ed and Henry to a farm and kind of move away from the town because she believed that the townspeople were all prostitutes and that they would corrupt her children. And she said that all people are evil, and so she just basically wanted to shield them away from having any kind of socialization with anybody because she felt like they would, corrupt her children. And so Ed and his brother didn't really get much, socializations. Whenever they tried to make friends, their mom would negate that, like try to stop it. She would even reprimand them for trying to make friends. And so he wasn't allowed to have friends. He could only leave the farm to go to school. And so he's just like sucked in this little world of his mom's crazy beliefs, and the only person he has is his older brother and his parents. Ed, in school, he was bullied in school. He would often like laugh to himself, almost like he's telling himself a private joke, and he would just kind of be isolative and to himself. He had like what people called an effeminate manner to him, and so the other kids bullied him, and he would have like these, like I said, these bursts of laughter to himself. So a lot of the kids were like, that's really weird. Because, like, who knows what he's telling himself in his mind, like, maybe he's like, oh, man, all these kids fucking suck, or something. I don't know. You can't really, I guess, blame him for not knowing how to be social and make friends when he wasn't allowed to do that. He wasn't allowed to leave his house except for school, and that's it. And so when he'd come home from school, his mom would just read Bible verses to them for hours. And so he ended up just, becoming obsessed with his mom, and she really was like the love of his life, his whole life, his lifeline. His father died in 1940 because he was a crippling alcoholic. he finally became ill and he succumbed to his illness. In the research I did, I read that, you know, Ed and his mom, they weren't very sad. They were kind of like, all right, like, good riddance, like, to this man. We don't need him. We don't want him. Like, goodbye. And so Ed was now just left with his mother and his brother. So as time went on, the Gein brothers were needing to make money and kind of like help with the farm and the duties at the farm. And so they would take odd jobs in the town, and the townspeople were like, you know, they're just a reliable pair. They did good work, good enough work to score these jobs, and people thought they were reliable and consistent, and so like they were able to work and make money. So they just mainly worked as handymen, and Ed even had some gigs babysitting from time to time, which, I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine after everything happens and you're one of the parents that had hired Ed Gein to babysit your kids, and then after, you know, all the news breaks out and you read all the articles and you find out all the like macabre things that he did, you're like, man, I'll let this kid watch my kids and be alone with my kids. It's very scary. But Ed had said that he liked being around children, possibly because he, you know, felt like a child. I don't know, but he liked being around children, and to my knowledge and the research I've done, there is nothing to indicate that he was ever inappropriate with the children, but it's still very awkward. On May 16th, 1944, there was a bushfire at the farm, and Ed and his brother were trying to fight the fire, and somehow they got separated, and Ed ended up calling the police and the firefighters only after the fire had died down, and said he couldn't find his brother and that they had gotten separated when they were trying to, you know, die down the fire. And so a search party ensued, and Ed led the search party directly to his brother's body. When they found Henry, the area he was in was not disturbed by fire, so like it was just, you know, there was no traces of fire where he was. He had bruises on his head. Foul play wasn't necessarily their first thought, but they were like, this is kind of weird. And some investigators actually thought that Ed could have killed his brother because the brother didn't have any signs of dying by fire. It was very mysterious circumstances. I think it's also the time. I feel like if that happened now, I don't know, there'd be a lot more tests, and they'd be like, no, like this guy died from blunt force trauma to the head. I mean, he didn't die in the fire. The coroner listed Henry's death as asphyxiation, and no charges were ever pressed on Ed. However, as I mentioned, some investigators kind of had suspicions that Ed had killed his brother, and it's very possible and likely that he did, because Ed idolized his mother. She could do no wrong in his eyes. Whereas Henry started to kind of question his mom, question the bond that Ed and his mom had, because they were very close. And he would just like try to tell Ed, like, listen, like, we don't need to listen to mom. Like, her ideas are crazy. And so he was just rejecting his mom's ideas and ideology. And that had upset Ed, because his mom was his whole world, and he was like, no, like, don't talk about mom like that. And so it is possible that maybe he ended up killing his brother because he was getting upset that his brother was kind of questioning him about their mom and their relationship, and just, you know, going against everything that his mom was saying. Ed's mother, Augusta, had a stroke, and Ed ended up taking care of her. He was with her, and she was able to recuperate a little bit, and Ed was just alone with his mom. And then Augusta had a second stroke, and this time around she was a lot more ill, and shortly after his mom passed away. And Ed was devastated. Like, the man couldn't go on. People had said that at his mom's funeral, he was inconsolable to a whole nother level. Like, he just couldn't stop crying. I mean, it's his mom, it's understandable, but he was just completely inconsolable. The one person he had in his life that he loved, his mom was the love of his life, and now he's just all alone. Ed ends up going back to the farm and just kind of closing off every room in the house that his mother had been in, worked in, lived in. He just didn't want anything to do with it. He boarded all the rooms up, like the living room, his mom's room. He boarded up pretty much the whole house and only had the kitchen and one room that he would use. Everything else was kept exactly the way his mom had left it. It was just almost like a time capsule of before his mom's death. However, Ed was not very good at upkeep or maintaining it, and so the house became very deteriorated. He just kind of let it go to trash. Like, he didn't clean, he didn't do anything. So Ed would continue to get money from odd jobs here and there, nothing necessarily too stable, and he started to get into like these cult magazines, and they would talk about cannibalism. Is really, you know, weird magazines about death. He was just like into that kind of, I guess, those kind of magazines. I mean, I've never heard of a cult magazine or like a death like magazine, or you know, but it was just magazines talking about cannibalism and cults. On November 16th, 1957, a local hardware store owner disappeared, and police had suspected Gein of her disappearance because he had been seen earlier that day at the hardware store. People had seen him with her. He had gone to the store the night before, saying that he had to buy antifreeze, and he had told the owner that he would be back the next morning. So he did come back the next morning. That's why the police were like, oh, maybe, you know, we at least need to talk to him because he's the last person that was seen with her or had any contact with her. So police were looking for Bernice Warden, who was the hardware store owner, and they went to go talk to Ed about his interactions with Bernice. Did he see anything? Just kind of question him. When the police went to go investigate Ed's farm, they found the body of Bernice Warden. So they had found the body of Denise Warden. She had been fatally shot. She had been decapitated. Her body was hung upside down, and her torso had been cut like a deer, just like all the way through the bottom. There were many mutilations that were performed on her body that the coroner said happened after her death. The police arrest Gein, and they continue to search the house. As they're searching the house, everything just gets worse and worse. They had seasoned police that were just in horror of what they had seen. In this house, they had found 4 noses, bowls made out of human skull, also human skulls used as like the bedposts, human bone fragments, a human mask made out of human skin, or you know, a human's face, 10 female heads with the tops sewed off, human skin covering chairs, a shoebox full of female vulvas, organs in the fridge, lips on like the window shade, a belt made out of female nipples, a lampshade also made from human skin and human face, leggings made from human leg skin. Ugh, I can't. That's so sick. It's so gross. They also found Bernice Warden's head in a sack, and they also found the head of Mary Hogan in a paper bag. And Mary Hogan had been missing since 1954, and police never knew what happened to her. But once they were in Ed's house and they found her head, they realized that he had taken her, kidnapped her, and ultimately murdered her. The police were questioning Ed. he confessed to everything. Ed said that from 1947 to 1952, he had exhumed recently deceased corpses, and he would go to the graveyard and dig up bodies and just kind of take what he wanted, the body parts that he wanted. He said that he had done this about 40 times, and that each time he had done it in a dazed-like state. He confessed that the motive for doing these grave robbings was that he wanted to make a suit of a woman. So he wanted like a female suit to just kind of wear. He had gone back and forth where he didn't know if he wanted to be a female. He eventually just said that he wanted to make a female suit, and he would pick people that he thought resembled his mother so that he could ultimately make a female suit of his mother and crawl in her skin. He also admitted to killing Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden. During the interrogation, the sheriff, Art Shelley, he had become increasingly upset with Gein, and he banged his head in a brick wall, and was the reason that they got the confession in the first place. I mean, it didn't take a lot, but at first Ed was a little bit hesitant, but then as soon as Sheriff Shelley kind of banged him against the wall, he confessed. He folded very quickly. And because the sheriff did this, his initial confession was inadmissible in court. So Ed was charged with only one count of murder. So on November 21st, 1957, Ed Gein was charged with only one count of murder for the murder of Bernice Worden. However, he was found mentally incompetent to stand trial, and he had been sent to a state hospital where they ultimately diagnosed him as being schizophrenic. So he was sent to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane because he could not stand trial. So he was at the state hospital for a few years, and then in 1968, the psychiatrists and the doctors decided that Ed was competent to stand trial, and at least he was competent enough to stand trial. This second time around, Ed was a different person. He wasn't the meek little man that he had seemed to be. He would smile when the press would take pictures of him. He was a lot more talkative. But ultimately, on November 14th, 1968, the trial began and only lasted 1 week. So he was found guilty of one count of first-degree murder for the murder of Bernice Worden, but because he had already been declared legally insane, they could not send him to like a regular prison, and he ended up going to the Mendota Mental Health Institute for the rest of his life. On July 26, 1984, at the age of 77, Ed Gein died. Ed Gein died due to respiratory failure and cancer. Ed Gein was never tried for the murder of Mary Hogan. He was also considered a suspect in the disappearance of some local people that had disappeared. And I think also at that time, any disappearance or any kind of crime they try to pin on him, it is possible that he murdered more people. There were so many body parts at his house, so it was possible that he murdered more than just Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. Technically, to be classified as a serial killer, you have to have committed 3 murders in sequence, and technically Ed, although he did have a lot of body parts, a lot of them were from the grave robbings, and he was only responsible for the murder of Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. But if we count his brother's murder, I mean, does that make him a serial killer? I mean, either way, serial killer, depraved killer, whatever you want to call him, he was a very sick, twisted individual. I mean, imagine being the police and walking into that house and seeing all these things that just, they don't even seem real. Like, due to the time that this happened, they had let press and photographers in, and that's why there's so many pictures of the crime scene of Ed Gein's house. If you just look up Ed Gein crime scene photos, you will see like there is human gloves, like torsos, the nipple belt, the face. I mean, just thinking it's just so creepy. Sheriff Scully, who had been the sheriff that had interrogated Gein, actually died a year after his trial at the age of 43 due to heart failure. And a lot of his family members had said that he had been so traumatized by Ed Gein and his crimes that it ultimately led to his death. These crimes are so bad. All the things that he did, all the macabre things that he had in his house, just, I mean, who can live like that? Like, imagine, like, you have bowls out of human skull. Like, did he eat out of that? That's so crazy to me. It's just out of this world. And so I think because his crimes were so from a Hollywood movie script, you would think he was the eventual inspiration for some films, at least loosely being based on him. You know, I had seen in Silence of the Lambs where he's like putting on the hair, and he also was sewing the skin. Alright guys, well, let me know what more Halloween themed videos you guys want to see. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, give it a subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.